Hello, Miles to Go, Chapter 47. The last time I was in Yellowstone, I was wearing Superman underwear. Alan Christopherson's diary. When I was 7 years old, my family took a trip to Yellowstone National Park, the same trip my father and I had talked about at the IHOP. That was years ago, a unique era when America's love affair with the car was on par with our old fear of beeping Russian satellites. There was a remarkable, though admittedly charming naivete to our perception of the park, almost a collective suspension of reality in our national imagination. Yellowstone was just a grand outdoor stage show with animal actors conveniently placed for our entertainment. Moose were gawking, bullwinkle creatures, and bears were domesticated furballs with names like Yogi and Boo Boo, who loved picnic baskets and tourists and were more than happy to pose for photographs. It has taken more than a few grisly maulings to alter our collective paradigm. Wild animals are, well, wild. While my mother was standing in line at the restroom near the Old Faithful Inn, my father and I watched a tourist. I remember her looking like a larger version of Lucille Ball, walk up to a wild buffalo for a prized photo op, her husband eyeing her through the lens piece of a Brownie camera, verbally nudging her. Just a little closer, Madge. Yep, just a few steps more. Yep, like that. Put your hand up. Yeah, rub its neck. The buffalo looked at her through glassy eyes roughly the size of tennis balls, like she was the stupidest creature on God's green earth, possibly true, trying to decide whether to walk away in disgust or trample her for the ultimate good of the human gene pool. My dad watched the scene unfold with a curious mixed expression of amusement and envy. Ultimately, the buffalo didn't do anything but walk away. Sometimes nature takes compassion on stupidity. I don't know what self-talk might take place in a buffalo's brain, but I imagine it went something like this. These guys are really at the top of the food chain? Like so much of life, the anticipation of that trip was even better than the trip itself. A few weeks before our vacation, my mother took me to the Buster Brown shoe store to buy some new Keds, green canvas boat shoes with white trimmed soles, and a new t-shirt with a picture of Charlie Brown running at a football held by Lucy. Digression. Why, oh why, didn't Charles Schulz let Charlie Brown kick the football in his last comic strip? What hope he could have left humanity. We were in the car for a length of time that, to my young mind, seemed the equivalent of my entire second grade year, but in the end it was all worth it. Being an only child, I was denied the pleasure of fighting with a sibling. He's on my side of the car. He stuck his tongue out at me. He touched me first. But on the plus side, I did have the entire back seat to lie down. We owned a candy apple red Ford Galaxie 500, a car slightly larger than a sand barge with considerably worse mileage. I remember once we were climbing a hill and my father pointed to the gas gauge and said, "Watch this." He pressed down on the gas pedal and the gas needle visibly dropped a point or two. My father was uncharacteristically generous on that trip, and I was allowed, actually encouraged, to purchase a souvenir. I chose a ceramic bear with fuzz painted on all the right places, in a box that had a wood-burned sketch of Old Faithful. I remember the agonizing internal debate that went on in my young mind between choosing an authentic Indian hand-sewn leather wallet, manufactured in Taiwan, or the box. In the end, the box won out since it had a real lock and key. My parents and I stood shoulder to shoulder with a crowd of tourists at Old Faithful, Yellowstone's most famous geyser. True to its name, the geyser erupted. I remember my father standing there, his hands thrust deep in his back pockets, my mother at his side, holding my hand lest I have the sudden impulse to run and jump on the spray. Old Faithful is neither the most spectacular nor the highest geyser in the park. What made Old Faithful so famous is its reliability and short window of eruptions. According to NASA, I'm not sure why they cared about such things, from 1870 through 1966, little had changed the geyser's eruption cycle. Before the feds made laws protecting the site, people would actually throw their laundry inside the geyser, which, I'm told, had a particularly pleasing effect to linen and cotton fabrics, but tended to tear woolen garments to shreds. Actually, Old Faithful's spout is not the kind of thing one sets a watch to, as its eruptions occur at intervals from 45 to 125 minutes apart, which means you could be standing there for 2 hours to watch a spray that may last only 90 seconds. A fitting analogy for life. I don't remember how long our eruption was. I just remember my father staring at the spot and awe and muttering, "Would you look at that?" If you put a gun to my head, I still couldn't tell you what it is about water shooting from a hole that would attract millions of tourists. It is the only time in my recollection that water spraying from the ground would warrant anything from my father except a curse and a call to the plumber. Later that same day, we stopped at the Morning Glory pool. Today, that amazing blue pool is fenced off, but back then it wasn't. There was just a little wood plank path that wound around it. Walking the path terrified me. The water is crystal clear, and the rock formation underneath looks like an open mouth. So even though the pool is only 23 feet deep, it seemed like a drop to the center of the earth. As we walked around the pool, I clung to my mother's hand, desperately fearing falling into the water and being lost in its depths. It never occurred to me that at 171.6 degrees, I would be burned into unconsciousness long before I hit bottom. Today, due to tourist abuse, the pool is mockingly called Fading Glory. The pool's once Windex blue color has changed from tourists tossing in tons of trash. Yes, tons. Which has blocked the pool's natural vents, lowered its temperature, and upset its balance. I'm not sure what would possess someone to throw trash into these beautiful pools, let alone tons of it. It's not as if Yellowstone doesn't offer 100,000 acres of convenient landfill. Clyde, dear, will you take the trash and dump it into the pristine crystal pools? Thanks, honey. But then it never occurred to me to wash my clothes in Old Faithful either. Maybe something's just wrong with me. I left Yellowstone Park certain that I would someday be a mountain man, traveling the wilderness alone, eating jerky and venison in my fringed rawhide suit, which, not counting the apparel, wasn't a far cry from where I was today. We should be careful of what we dream of, as apparently life, or God, has a sense of humor. My father liked to drive at night, and I slept for most of the ride home. I still remember the feel and smell of cold vinyl against my face. Somehow I woke in my own bed, the soft white sheets tucked in around me. I miss that childhood was magical that way. I haven't been back to Yellowstone